You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. What if always trying to hold it together is really just a way to feel safe in a chaotic world? Find out more in today's episode. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Perfectionism often develops quietly as a way to navigate uncertainty or protect ourselves from judgment. In this episode, we explore how those patterns take shape over time and what it looks like to begin softening them. The conversation brings a thoughtful lens to the ways we learn to strive, achieve, and hold it all together, even when it costs us our peace of mind. Dr. Tara Cousineau is a clinical psychologist, author, meditation teacher, and perfectionism coach with 20-plus years of experience helping high achievers cultivate self-compassion and authentic leadership. She's a staff psychologist at Harvard University's Counseling and Mental Health Services and an expert in mindfulness and mind-body medicine. Her book, The Perfectionist's Dilemma, guides readers in transforming perfectionism into greater ease and joy. Here is my interview with Dr. Tara Cousineau. Hi, Dr. Tara. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because overcoming perfectionism is such a topic that's dear to my heart, and I think something that a lot of listeners can identify with, and I absolutely look forward to chatting with you about that today. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Petra. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. And I think we're going to have a very important conversation and something that, like I said, I think a lot of listeners can identify with. So would you like to start us off with a little bit about yourself, maybe how your story connects to what you do today, and give our listeners a bit of insight about what it is that you do today?
Yes, well, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been a therapist for about 25 years, and I work with many people. Primarily, I started out working with girls and women and did a lot of parenting. I was a researcher in the area of body image, mindfulness, self-compassion. Over the years, it's sort of morphed as life takes you in different directions. I currently work at Harvard University's Counseling and Mental Health Center with emerging adults, young adults, I say the future leaders of the world. So it's a very international population. And I've just been someone who has always been interested in the healing arts. I knew when I was 11 years old that I was going to become a therapist. I just didn't know what that meant or what kind. So I had one of those aha moments when I was called into the guidance counseling office, and I thought, this person does not understand me at all. I can do a better job than him. And that sort of launched me on this career of helping others and feeling understood. And I think I was always just, as probably many of your guests are empaths and very sensitive to the world. So I became a therapist and love what I do and have had just the privilege of hearing probably thousands of stories and being witness to thousands of stories at this point in my career. And then the perfectionism piece, well, I was just born into an incubator of perfectionism. So it was something that I absorbed growing up. My mother is German. She has high values for organization and efficiency. You know, we couldn't go out and play until the rooms were dusted and cleaned and things like that. And then, of course, you grow up in a culture where there's so much rating and ranking, so it gets perpetually reinforced. And it's probably why I got involved in some of the body image research earlier on in my career, because it is very difficult to find your sense of self when the world is constantly and chronically telling you how you need to fit in. And then when I started, I trained actually at Harvard University or the medical school for my internship and postdoc. And that was many years ago. And then I kind of came around for a career shift and decided to go back to the basics and work directly with students. And I was just floored by the level of perfectionism, overthinking, the analysis paralysis, the challenges of trying to make your way. And in my private practice, I see young people that go to all the colleges and the university. So I live in a really intellectual hub in the United States. And here are these people who worked so hard in their life and they still don't feel like they've made it, or they still don't feel like they've achieved something. And it's really heartbreaking. So that's when I just started developing these perfectionism or overcoming perfectionism workshops and series.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And it sounds like something that most of us can benefit from. I feel like after our university time, we don't grow out of that. At least I feel that way. I still question the things I do or how I do them, or do they measure up? So I feel like there's not even a growing out of that after we leave university and start our lives in the real world. Do you find that over time, I mean, you've been in this field for a long time. Do you find that we're getting more connected on social media, the world is getting more connected? Do you find that this becomes harder now for even the younger generations and it starts earlier, this drive for perfectionism through social media and everything that we're connected with?
Absolutely. I always say, thank God I didn't have a smartphone when I was a kid. And I raised two daughters. They're in their 20s now. And I really remember the struggles when they were in like eighth and ninth grade and trying to have phone contracts. And it was an impossible sort of tidal wave, if you will, because that's how young people connect. And there's a lot of pressure on parents. And then there's just pressures as individuals, even if you don't have families, on all of this constant curation of people's lives. And it just feeds right into the comparing mind. And when I talk about perfectionism, I often say, listen, it's not your fault. And you might have a sensitivity, you might have certain values and ethics around high quality, and that's actually a beautiful thing. Why not strive for excellence? But we're bombarded constantly with these messages of more, more, better, better, better. It's like everything is against you, basically. And the research is bearing this out too. The research on perfectionism shows that it's been on the rise for the last 30 plus years. And there are different categories of perfectionism, if you will, because that's what researchers have to do. They have to kind of divvy things up. And so there's one category of perfectionism called socially prescribed perfectionism, which is that what I call the compare and despair perfectionism. And a lot of young people have that. They're constantly seeing what other people are doing or how easy it is for one person to become famous. And they're more vulnerable, actually, to anxiety and depression and body image concerns or eating disorders than, say, maybe what I would call myself a traditional perfectionist, sort of what would be called self-oriented perfectionism, that I'm the one that creates my own milestones and bars. I'm just very internally motivated. And the comparison is there, but I'm the harder judge on myself in that regard of trying to achieve. And that can be dangerous too, because that leads to burnout and so exhaustion. I would definitely say that I suffered with that unrelenting striving at some point until my body just said, enough, Tara, enough.
Yeah. And I think, or at least I feel that that happens to people younger and younger now, that they feel this mental burnout, physical burnout much younger than I think I felt that. That happened to me later in my career, but I feel like that happens earlier and earlier now. How do you define perfectionism, or what do you think perfectionism is in your opinion? Because I feel like there's a line where we can say, okay, we take pride in our work, or we like to look nice and that we care for ourselves. And those are all good things. But when does that turn into something negative or something that is unhealthy for us? Where does sort of that fine line run when it comes to perfectionism? And how do you look at that?
It's an excellent question because there's nothing wrong with striving for excellence. It's a noble value. And Really, I think that fine line that you speak about is a good way to think about it. Another way to think about it is that there's a tipping point. I see perfectionism as there's sort of an accrual of the negative effects over time if you can't find some way to balance things out in your life. There's actually a Canadian researcher that talks about this point of diminishing returns is that you can strive for excellence and keep doing better and trying to get better at something, but at some point that effort becomes inefficient. And that's when people start to make mistakes or to procrastinate. And all that extra effort actually is not serving you. We really want to help ourselves from not getting to that tipping point, if you will, where it's a point of diminishing returns, essentially. So, perfectionism for me, my definition is a little bit different than some of the researchers. I describe perfectionism as a paradox created by the need for belonging and a fear of rejection, paired with unrealistic expectations for achievement and approval that sap your life force or your energy. And I think that that's what's missing in a lot of the more classical descriptions of perfectionism, because it becomes more of this habit or this mindset. And I'm like, no, 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 it's not a mindset. It's not even a limiting belief, which people might describe it as. It really has become this sort of internal paradox or conflict of really trying to avoid a very primal basic need, which is for love and belonging. And it doesn't matter what color or stripe of perfectionism somebody has when they walk into my office, they are suffering from some sort of fear or anxiety around doing something wrong, getting kicked out of the tribe, being shamed in some way. And that comes from sort of deep roots, if you will. So it's this paradox. And perfectionism was a strategy. It literally is a strategy. And I say perfectionism is protection to offset the fear of being left out or being critiqued in some way. So if you can see perfectionism as protection, all of a sudden, I think people start to be kinder to themselves. Like, oh, right, this actually has really served me, but it's not serving me anymore. And then how do you release that?
It's really interesting that you say it's not a mindset thing, because many people would start off with that and say, okay, I need to change the way I think about this, or I need to change the way I react to certain things or behave in certain situations. So it's really interesting that you point that out. It does go much, much deeper than that. So some of the things that you touched on that you see in your own practice and with your own clients, or you mentioned anxiety and depression. So what are some of the things that we experience when that tipping point has been reached that we talked about? And maybe our strive for excellence or our pride in our work or a clean home has reached that tipping point, and we are now pushing more into the negative part of perfectionism. What happens to us mentally, emotionally, or I would even throw out there physically, because I feel like that can really happen alongside all the other things, is that we start having physical complaints. What is it that you observe in your practice and with your clients?
Well, I would absolutely say that what brings a perfectionist to my office is that they're having the physical manifestations. And that was my own story too. When I was in my early to mid 30s, I had just completed my PhD. I was starting my career. It was a really terrible job market at the time. I had a 2 and a 4-year-old maybe. And I had basically for 3 decades been just trying to work my butt off actually to make my way in the world. Didn't grow up with a lot of money. I was the first one to go really to college and then get a post-grad degree. I was really on that treadmill. And we're in the backyard and having a family barbecue. And all of a sudden, I just started feeling these sort of pulsations on the right side of my face and down my arm. And I actually thought I was having a stroke. I mean, I was in the health psychology. I knew what some symptoms were. And I looked at my husband, barbecue utensils in hand, and said, I think I'm having a stroke. Call 911. And then I just kind of passed out. And then I get carted off by the ambulance and go to the hospital. And they're like, no, you're fine. You're not having a stroke. And I was like, well, what is this? I could still feel this sort of tingling sensation in my face. And it was driving me mad. And it took months, I have to tell you, months to kind of figure it out. And it was only until I got to a general dental appointment where I described to the dentist, I said, this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like I've got spider webs on the side of my face and my lips are tingling. And he said, well, this sounds like trigeminal neuralgia. And I was like, well, what the heck is that? And basically, it's like you're having this tension around a nerve that kind of emanates from your ear. It made complete sense that it was this nerve pain that I was experiencing. I was like, oh my gosh, this is where my life has come. And it took actually a lot of alternative medicine because the neurologist was like, you're fine. There's no brain tumor. They ruled all that out. You're just stressed out. And I got really angry. And I was like, I'm not stressed out. But of course, on some level, I was really stressed out. But it was more this underlying tension, I think, that accumulated over time. Then I started going to a chiropractor and having acupuncture. I re-engaged now that my kids were up and about, and I was re-engaged with yoga. So I had to throw myself into these healing arts, if you will. And over time, that pain actually, it did go away. That was sort of my introduction to the diminishing returns on perfectionism because it was my body that had to get me into treatment. That's my story on how it started. But I have to say, like you were mentioning, does it ever really go away? It's something that kind of plagues us, I think, throughout life, given the cultures and sort of our own personalities, that we have to just be kinder to ourselves along the way.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you say that because I feel like a lot of things eventually do come out on the physical plane and they may start in the mental space or in the emotional space, but at some point, our body is what will flag us and throw up sort of that big sign that says, okay, you need to take another look. Yes, something's not quite aligned here. It's interesting that you also went on that journey. And I feel like that would be very beneficial when you're working with clients to understand what they're going through and where they're coming from and some of the things that they're experiencing around perfectionism. Now, how do we work with this? Maybe it's something that will never quite resolve because it is part of our lives, but is there a way that we can find a balance in our lives when it comes to perfectionism? Can we learn? Can we find ways to change how we approach different situations? Or how does that work when you work with your clients on that?
Yes, well, good question. I do think it is more of a process and an unfolding. So I wrote a book called The Perfectionist Dilemma. And in that book, I describe a method. It has 6 steps, and they don't need to go really in any particular order, although having awareness is always the first step. And I do start with getting grounded in your own body. And that can be very challenging for people who identify as perfectionists or identify with this experiencing of sort of not good enough or never enough, is that there's so much in their heads. And the first step is really to actually help introduce people back to their bodies in some very basic ways. And this is standard in a lot of, I think, wellness approaches, is to help people get grounded and into their body and just get curious about it and just start to make some connections. Like, where do you feel your tension and where do you feel your distress and your pain? Many perfectionists come in with this sort of companion symptom, if you will, which is procrastination. And I always say that the near sisters of perfectionism are workaholism on the one side and procrastination on another. There's this internal paradox of striving, and then putting on the brakes. Well, where do you feel either of those experiences in your body? How do you know when you're getting there? I have this acronym called EVOLVE, and the first step is sort of getting embodied and then validating your experience and your feelings. So that's the V in evolve. And that's largely because many people who experience perfectionism really need to be in control all the time. And when you need to be in control, you actually just push down feelings or not even really identified. And when you do feel something, it just goes right to like 100% of feeling overwhelmed. It's like, wait a minute, there's probably lots of nuanced feelings and sensations under the umbrella of overwhelm. Let's dig a little bit deeper. There's that. And then there's what I call really heart opening exercises, really kind of connecting to yourself, which can also feel very vulnerable for perfectionists. Who are you when you're at your best self? Can you remember a time when you felt most fully alive? People often either are blocked in that regard or they burst into tears because it was so long ago. Really learning to kind of practice self-compassion. So that's very much sort of a mainstay of my work. And then when people can begin to practice sort of a mindful self-compassion approach, being kinder to themselves, giving themselves a break, then we kind of get to the harder work, which is identifying the inner critical narratives. So the L in evolve is love your inner critic, which people just balk at first. Like, I don't want this inner critic. I don't want this any part of my life. And I'm like, no, no, no. If you can be with me on this point that perfectionism is protection, how is that inner critic trying to protect you or warn you or motivate you? And what kind of inner critic is it anyway? Because again, I'm very careful with words like overwhelm or inner critics. Like, oh no, there's so many more nuances when we start to kind of peel under the layers. And I actually have a whole workshop series just on befriending the inner critic because it takes a little bit of kind awareness and attention to start looking at, oh, it's an inner bully, it's an inner judge, or no, it's a nitpicker. Like I definitely have an inner nitpicker, can't help it, grew up with nitpickers all around me. Or that inner detective, I need to find the answers to everything. And my favorite, which almost every perfectionist can identify with on some level, is like an inner joy thief. Perfectionists don't have a lot of fun in life. And it was actually a student who named that for me. I'm like, oh my God, that is so true. So it was like, aha moment is that perfectionists actually can't even have fun. They don't allow themselves that. So when we start to identify these different narratives and these different parts, we really start to cultivate a relationship with that part. Say that younger part, like the 12-year-old girl who walked through the school cafeteria and all the boys were rating the girls and she got zeros. Oh my God, that's a little trauma. How do we identify with that? How do we care for that part? That's like the heart of a lot of the work. And then once we kind of get through that, and you can kind of say, oh, yeah, my inner bully totally acted up this week. Well, give it a name. Know that it's trying to protect you. It might be using the wrong strategies. So let's help it find other strategies to use. Towards the end of sort of this process is really committing to yourself. I call it making a vow, is identifying how do you want to live into your life in a way where you have more ease and joy and freedom. And to really commit to that, is cultivating new habits, learning how to take in the good instead of seeing everything that can possibly go wrong. And then really identifying with the energies of self-compassion. And the last E is energy, which actually could be the first E as well. And that's a whole nother story about how I've really started to incorporate energy psychology and energy medicine into the work that I do. It's a little bit untraditional or unconventional, but there's plenty of evidence now that shows the value of these kinds of strategies. And it's not the first sell with perfectionists. So I have to kind of go, all right. And then I start giving them energy medicine tools. And by that point, they trust me and they're like, okay, this is a little woo for me, but I'm going to try it. And so they try tapping or certain gentle touch on certain acupressure points that help to calm the fight, flight, freeze responses and things like that. So that's my method. I know that was a lot of talking for your listeners, but the acronym is EVOLVE, and you can learn about it in my book and future courses that I do.
I love that acronym and all the things that go into it. It sounds like such an empowering path to working with our inner critic, to really starting that self-love process a little bit, which I feel is part of why we lose so much joy when we're constantly criticizing ourselves and chasing after that perfectionism. There's a lot of that going on where we lose the joy out of life, as you said. So I love that acronym. And I do love the energy part because I think that is one piece that is missing in a lot of traditional approaches. So I feel that fills a gap for a lot of people. And tapping is very effective, and acupressure as well, and acupuncture and working with the meridians. So I feel like that is a really good fit for people looking to kind of start on that path.
Absolutely. I actually say it's the missing link all the time. And when people say, well, what's the evidence for this? I'm like, well, did you know that there's a meta-analysis on touch practices? There's a meta-analysis, or actually several, on emotional freedom technique, which is tapping. The evidence is building up. It's just not mainstream yet. And yet it's very ancient. These come from ancient traditions and practices. And when I get an email, so I was working with a former Olympian in a certain sport, and really for a number of years, and she really was having a hard time with her inner critic. It was very deep from childhood. And I said, okay, listen, we just have to try some tapping. Come along with the ride. And I started working, just doing some simple tapping on really sort of the inner critical narratives that she was holding. And I said, there's apps for this. You can go online. You don't necessarily need me. This is your homework. 2 weeks later, I get an email, just one subject line, tapping, it works. And I was like, ah. Somehow she released for herself that energy block that was there. Because if she could change her mind, she would. She was coming to therapy to change her mind. And I think a lot of therapies are so cognitively based and oriented, and they miss this very key piece of these sort of subtle energy and blocks, and energy could be flowing in reverse. Like, that's not very good. You're not going to be moving forward in your life if your energies are flowing backwards. I always say I sneak the energy medicine tools in, and those are the tools that people like the best.
Yeah, I can definitely see why. And I do find them very effective in places that you just can't talk your way out of or into, because that seems to be a bit of that gap in talk therapy and some of, like you said, the more cognitive or behavioral therapies. A lot of these things we can't reason or talk our way out of it. So we need to come to the subtle energies and to a different way of accessing that and addressing it. So yeah, I love that. That's wonderful that you're incorporating that. And yes, there's a lot of evidence actually coming through studies, and there's more and more all the time on especially tapping and energy psychology also, I think, and acupressure, acupuncture, all of those things. So definitely we're heading down a path where I believe that will become more and more mainstream as people are experiencing the benefits of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's exciting, actually. I find it very exciting. Yes.
Yeah. And for students, this is a new door for them to walk through and find another path in their healing. It's always a challenge, I feel, because perfectionism, like many other things, feels different for different people and maybe takes different ways of addressing it for different people. So I love the fact that you're offering that option for people to take advantage of. That's wonderful. You touched on your book as well, The Perfectionist's Dilemma, and you let us know that you have the 6 steps in there. What else can readers take away from your book? Is there anything in particular that you would like them to think about or take away as they're reading that?
Well, I first hope that people will feel understood and empathy for perfectionism and their particular habits or fears. I'm hoping it's relatable. There are many little anecdotes and stories in there that are composites of real people and real conversations. So I'm hoping that it's relatable. And one of the things that I think is so important is really helping not just students, but anybody. I mean, I have people in my private practice that are 75 years old and they're still struggling with not feeling good enough. These are things that don't go away. It's really become almost a nervous system habit. I really like to do some psychoeducation on the nervous system, on the different aspects of the nervous system, the vagus nerve, that's about, how to learn how to kind of calm yourself. So I do a lot of education on the nervous system, because if you can see that really your behaviors and your thoughts are also rooted in the nervous system and these very basic responses, that your body is actually working in the way it was designed. If it anticipates a fear, it's going to go into a fear response. Intellectually, that might not make sense for people because they're not making the connection like, oh, this is my nervous system and it's actually designed this way. But wait a minute, is it responding in a way that's appropriate to this situation? And often it's not. So one example is, and this is not just for students, but this happens in the workplace too, where you're put on the spot in some way. You get called on in class and you have to identify something in a law case, let's say, or you need to speak up in a team meeting, and all of a sudden your body is just going into complete panic mode. And you know that you're going into panic mode. And then because you know you're going into panic mode, it makes it worse. Like, it's a reinforcing loop. But if you knew that you could actually do some very basic skills, like feel your feet on the floor and start to breathe down to the earth, or hold two acupuncture points, one on like giving yourself a secret self hug. There's the triple warmer meridian. You hold your elbow at the dimple, give a little light tap, and then the other hand on the rib cage. So if readers could imagine just kind of you're giving yourself a secret self hug, if you will, but you're holding two acupressure points and you breathe for a few minutes. It immediately calms the nervous system. I almost teach this every single week when someone comes in for like an urgent care appointment and they're all in a tizzy about something. I'm like, wait, stop. Can you just do this with your hands? Can you just put your fingers here, above the elbow and the other hand on your rib, like you're giving yourself a hug, and just do some good belly breaths? Almost inevitably, people are like, oh, okay, I feel so much better now. I'm like, great. You know what? You can use that in class. You can use that in your meetings. Try it, do it every day. And then people start to kind of connect like, oh, right, I actually have more control than I think that I do, because you do. I do a lot of teaching around really helping regulate your nervous system. And I think when you can do that, all that thinking stuff and overanalyzing and perfectionism habits, they start to soften a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The nervous system underpins a lot of issues, I would imagine, that you see in your practice as well. So
I say there's the physical, it's our nervous system, and then there's the metaphysical, which is our subtle energies, and they really go hand in hand. And I think people relate to that. And it's also a relief because they think it's all in their mind and there's something wrong with them and they have to change how they think. But I'm like, if you could change how you think, you'd shift that in a second. But there's something else going on that's kind of keeping certain patterns stuck in place.
yeah, and when that is stuck in our biology, then we need to come back to a more comprehensive and integrative approach for addressing that. So
absolutely,
that makes sense. Now, if our listeners are curious at this point, and maybe some of them have experienced perfectionism or are experiencing it or have been looking for solutions of how to work with that, how can our listeners reach you? Where can they find you? And what kind of things can they work on you with? And what kind of programs and services do you offer?
Oh, goodness. Those are a lot of questions. So I will be offering a Befriending the Inner Critic workshop online so that I can reach more people, and also a series called The Peaceful Perfectionist, which is going to go through the Evolve method. So people can find me on my website, which is my name. You'll probably have it in your show notes. And they can also actually download free tools on the book's website, which is perfectionistdilemma.com. Just sign up to download those tools, and there's some videos and that teach some of these skills that I was trying to describe here today. That's how people can find me. I also have a newsletter Substack, which is called The Peaceful Perfectionist, where I will be posting articles and audio meditations. That's also going to be a nice resource I'm building up now, and it's kind of exciting and fun to do. My goal is to share this with the world in the easiest ways possible. And I also do one-to-one private coaching. I usually do coaching packages for 6 or 12 sessions with people who really want to invest the time in making some changes in their life. So from the free tools to one-on-one, there are many options.
Sounds wonderful. And we, of course, will be linking to all of Dr. Tara's offerings in the show notes as well, as she said. And we will make sure that we link to your book, the resources, to your website, any of the courses and programs that you have upcoming, I'm sure will be listed on there as well, so that our listeners can connect with that and find some of those resources for their own lives. And I have a feeling that there is a lot of people listening that have experienced that inner critic or have experienced perfectionism. I feel like you almost can't get away from that nowadays, whether that be in your relationships. Am I a good enough parent? Am I doing enough? Or am I good enough at work or a good enough entrepreneur? There's so many things going on in our lives today that it's very, very easy to fall into that and to beat yourself up over that every single day. I don't know, there's some studies on how many negative thoughts we have every day running through our heads as well. And it's a lot. I think it's in the tens of thousands.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Right? Something like 80% of what we think about is negative. And we
yeah.
supposedly, it's just like, oh my gosh, that's so hard. And we can't help it because we have a really tricky brain that's going to, by design, focus on the potential dangers in the world. And we have to actually really learn how to kind of help our tricky brains not reinforce those patterns and actually create new patterns. And so and kind of do a little bit of rewiring, if you will. So yes, we can't help the sea of perfectionism and never enough that we live in, but we can actually help ourselves in the midst of all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Take advantage of that, listeners, and have a look at the show notes and see what kind of resources you want to work with. And if you want to connect with Dr. Tara, thank you, Dr. Tara, for being here today. I feel like this was such an important topic to explore and to talk about. And I really appreciate you taking the time today to come on here and join me and have this conversation with me and share all this knowledge and wisdom with our listeners. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. I very much appreciate it. And take really good care of yourself. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.